In the rugged heart of western Mexico, where the highlands of Jalisco bleed into the tangled valleys of Michoacan, a strange silence covered the land on the morning of what would later be known as the 5-Hour Massacre. Locals remembered the day not because they saw anything, but because they didn't. The roads, usually buzzing with pickup trucks carrying avocados, cattle feed, and schoolchildren, felt eerily deserted. Even the dogs refused to bark. Something was moving in the shadows, and although nobody knew it yet, the next 5 hours would become one of the most lethal rural confrontations in recent Mexican history. This is the story of the alleged raid on a suspected CJNG ranch, an event shrouded in mystery, official statements, conflicting reports, and whispered rumors about a secretive special operations unit known only as the Bats. The first indications of trouble began just before dawn. Satellite imagery obtained later by investigative journalists showed a pattern that raised immediate suspicion. 6 white pickup trucks traveling in a loose staggered formation along a dirt road near Rancho El Mirador, a remote property rumored for years to be a CJNG safe haven. The convoy moved without headlights, maintaining a precise 10-meter spacing, too disciplined for civilians, too quiet for regular federal forces. Radio intercepts recorded that morning also detected something unusual. Encrypted communication bursts at frequencies typically associated with tactical gear used by elite anti-organized crime units. Although no agency officially confirmed it, several former officers interviewed for this documentary claimed the signatures resembled the equipment used by a classified strike group known internally as the Bats, Brigada de Asalto Táctico Secreto, a rapid response outfit designed for high-risk, high-value raids deep in cartel-controlled territory. For months beforehand, intelligence analysts believed that the CJNG had transformed several ranches across the Jalisco, Michoacan corridor into fortified micro-compounds, combining agricultural cover with hidden bunkers, makeshift armories, and tactical escape trails carved through dense vegetation. Similar setups had been discovered during the Tanhuato raid in 2015, where federal forces confronted a heavily armed cartel group at a property called Rancho del Sol, resulting in dozens of fatalities and significant controversy over what exactly had happened. The blueprint was always the same: cattle pens up front, tactical rooms in the back, blind corners, and elevated firing zones disguised as hay storage. El Mirador, investigators believed, followed this model almost identically. But what made the situation at El Mirador particularly volatile was an intelligence report filed just weeks earlier. According to sources, a rival cartel informant, possibly coerced, claimed the ranch recently received a shipment of heavy-caliber weapons, including .50 caliber Barrett rifles, belt-fed machine guns, and improvised armored pickup trucks, similar to the infamous Camioneta Monstruo seen in several CJNG operations across Michoacan. The informant insisted that close to 80 armed men rotated through the property in 3 shifts, using it as a staging point for extortion, fuel theft, and territorial incursions. If true, this ranch wasn't just a hideout, it was a forward operating base. Still, nothing about that morning suggested panic. Inside the ranch, life unfolded as if nothing unusual lay ahead. In the main courtyard, 2 men cleaned their rifles while a third started a fire beneath a metal drum, preparing meat for breakfast. A radio played banda music softly from under a tin roof, its signal drifting in and out with the wind. The men had no idea that thermal cameras mounted on a surveillance drone were mapping their every movement from thousands of feet above. The Bats, whoever they officially belonged to, had been watching this ranch for weeks, timing guard rotations, tracking weapon transfers, documenting every truck entering or leaving. What happened next was not a spontaneous firefight. It was a meticulously engineered assault. At 7:14 a.m., a decision was made. Investigators believe the moment came when a man stepped outside the main house carrying a long case shaped unmistakably like a sniper rifle bag. The drone operator, positioned miles away, marked the signal and transmitted a single coded message: "Package confirmed." Within minutes, elite operators began moving into their attack positions. 3 teams approached from the east, using an abandoned irrigation trench for cover. Another group circled around to the west, navigating thorny mesquite bushes and dry creek beds. A fifth unit, possibly the command team, held position at a ridge providing a clear vantage point of the entire ranch. The official narrative would later claim the operators intended only to serve an arrest warrant, but multiple sources, including a retired federal intelligence analyst interviewed anonymously, disputed that claim. He insisted there was no feasible scenario in which an attempted peaceful entry into a compound holding nearly 80 armed men could be justified. When you go to a location like that, he said, you're not going for a conversation, you're going for war. And war is exactly what unfolded. At 7:29 a.m., a sudden burst of gunfire tore through the quiet landscape. Witnesses miles away reported hearing a rapid metallic thunder rolling across the valley. It was later determined that the first shots came from the ranch, possibly accidental, possibly triggered by a lookout who spotted movement near the eastern fence line. Whatever the cause, those first seconds sealed the fate of everyone inside El Mirador. The Bats teams responded instantly, unleashing controlled, disciplined volleys designed to suppress enemy fire while advancing. Within minutes, the firefight intensified into a full-scale confrontation reminiscent of the infamous Rancho del Sol clash. The air filled with dust, smoke, and the deep thump of grenade launchers echoing against the valley walls. Inside the ranch, panic spread quickly. Men scrambled for weapons, yelling orders and curses, tripping over chairs and buckets as they rushed to defensive positions. Several attempted to escape through the southern exit, not realizing that another operator team had already sealed it off. Others climbed onto rooftops, trying to establish a high ground advantage, only to be met with precision fire that pinned them down instantly. The alleged elite unit moved with coordinated, silent precision, advancing in waves, never breaking formation, never staying exposed more than 3 seconds. Their movements resembled the armored vehicle assault tactics seen in Sicario, Day of the Soldado, but executed with the ruthless efficiency of real-world training. By 8:00 a.m., the confrontation had become a full-blown siege. Smoke from burning vehicles began rising into the sky, visible even from neighboring villages. Radio chatter intercepted later revealed the cartel attempting to call reinforcements from another ranch, but the lines went dead, likely jammed. The Bats had reportedly deployed electronic interference equipment, a technique consistent with high-level tactical operations. With communications severed and exits blocked, the men inside El Mirador realized the awful truth. They were surrounded, outgunned, and cut off. The fight was no longer about defending territory, it was about survival. The first 30 minutes of the confrontation at Rancho El Mirador had already shattered the fragile silence of the Jalisco highlands, but what followed transformed the raid into one of the longest sustained rural gunfights recorded in the region since the infamous Tanhuato and Rancho del Sol operations. By 8:05 a.m., the ranch had become a maze of smoke, shattered wood, collapsing tin roofs, and ricocheting bullets. Operators of the alleged Bats unit moved with uncanny synchronization, advancing yard by yard, their silhouettes barely visible through the haze. Every decision they made, every angle they cleared reflected months of surveillance and tactical rehearsals. This was not improvisation. This was an execution of a military-grade battle plan. Inside the ranch, the defenders struggled to find order in chaos. The CJNG-linked gunmen had the numbers nearly. 80 men cycled through the ranch in rotating shifts, according to intelligence, but they lacked the one element that turned battles: leadership. Their presumed commander had reportedly left the ranch 2 nights earlier for a meeting in the neighboring municipality. In his absence, decision-making fell to a handful of mid-level enforcers who were now overwhelmed by the ferocity of the assault. Their shouts, panicked, frantic, echoed across the inner courtyard, "Cubrance, por la barda. Cierren la entrada, sir," but their voices were drowned out by the relentless percussion of automatic fire. The first major turning point came at approximately 8:17 a.m. when a pickup truck hidden under a camouflage tarp suddenly roared to life behind the livestock sheds. According to forensic investigations later conducted at the scene, the vehicle had been retrofitted with thick steel plates, sandbags, and a crude swivel mount for a .50 caliber machine gun. The so-called camioneta monstrua was intended to serve as both mobile cover and suppressive fire, a tactic CJNG cells had perfected in battles across Tepelcatepec, Aguililla, and Buenavista. As the vehicle lurched forward, it opened fire blindly toward the eastern perimeter, unleashing devastating rounds that tore through adobe walls and sent clouds of debris into the air. But the operators had anticipated this. Intelligence analysts had warned that the ranch likely held at least one modified armored truck, citing drone imagery from earlier surveillance flights. A BATS team stationed on the ridge immediately responded. Using the high ground advantage, they deployed a shoulder-fired launcher, its type never officially confirmed, and struck the vehicle's rear axle with surgical precision. The explosion didn't flip the truck, but it crippled its mobility. The armored beast shuddered, veered sideways, and slammed against a trough. For several seconds, the gunner inside continued firing, but another volley from the ridge silenced the weapon. Flames erupted beneath the hood, and thick black smoke spiraled upward like a distress signal. That smoke marked the moment the battle escalated into something closer to urban warfare. Operators pushed deeper into the property, encountering pockets of gunmen entrenched behind feed storage, overturned wheelbarrows, and concrete pillars. Grenades detonated intermittently, sending shockwaves through the corrals. The firefight resembled scenes from Narcos, Mexico, the same brutal choreography of fear, confusion, and violence, but the stakes were far more real. At least 15 defenders fell in the first hour alone, according to numbers later reconstructed by investigative reporters. Others lay wounded, crawling through dust, dragging themselves behind crumbling walls. Meanwhile, the alleged BATS command team coordinated the assault methodically. Radio logs obtained through leaked files suggested 3 phases of attack. Phase 1: Isolation. Block exits, jam communications, neutralize heavy weapons. Phase 2: Penetration. Blow through secondary structures, divide the defense into smaller clusters, cut off access to main house. Phase 3: Final Sweep. Move room to room, verify identities, secure weapons, extract detainees if any survived. By 9:04 a.m., Phase 2 was fully underway. Operators breached the first internal barrier using controlled explosives, small directional charges designed to minimize collateral damage while clearing entry points. The blast created a cloud of dust that rolled like a wave into the central patio. Under its cover, 2 assault teams advanced, one along the left corridor toward the kitchen area, another pivoting right toward the barn. Gunfire erupted from both directions. The kitchen unit found themselves pinned by 3 riflemen firing from behind a brick stove. After a tense exchange, the operators flanked them through a narrow service passage, neutralizing the resistance. But the most intense fighting unfolded near the barn. Nearly 20 armed men had taken defensive positions there, using cattle pens and feed trucks as barriers. Their firepower was significant: AK-style rifles, AR-15 variants, and at least 1 grenade launcher based on later fragment analysis. For nearly 40 minutes, this sector became the epicenter of the battle. Operators moved cautiously, inching forward while laying suppressive fire. Witnesses from a nearby hill reported hearing a continuous roar that lasted so long it felt like an earthquake. One villager later told reporters, "It was as if the world was cracking open." At 10:19 a.m., after prolonged gunfighting, the barn sector finally collapsed. Several defenders attempted to surrender but were caught in crossfire as bullets ricocheted unpredictably off steel beams and machinery. Others ran toward the backfields only to find the perimeter sealed. By this point, the casualties had climbed steeply, though exact numbers remained disputed due to conflicting official statements and missing forensic records. The ranch was now half in ruins, roof panels torn, fences shattered, thick smoke coating every surface. Still, the battle was far from over. The remaining defenders shifted their final stand to the main house, a 2-story structure made of reinforced concrete. This was the stronghold. The place intelligence analysts believed contained sensitive documents, cash reserves, and possibly the regional coordinator's personal safe. The house had narrow windows offering sniper angles, fortified doors, and even a concealed tunnel exit, though the BATS teams had reportedly blocked this tunnel from the outside earlier in the operation. The defenders inside fought with desperate tenacity, firing through cracks in the shutters, dropping makeshift explosives down the stairwells, and attempting to ignite fuel containers as a barrier. To break this resistance, the operators adopted an approach reminiscent of the Equinjureo/Rancho del Sol raid, where tactical forces pushed systematically through thick walls and blind rooms. They advanced floor by floor, clearing hallways, dragging wounded outside, and identifying suspects using portable scanners and tablets. This phase, perhaps the most grueling, stretched from late morning into the early afternoon, pushing the total battle duration toward the 4-hour mark. As the clock passed 11:40 a.m., the defenders' fire had weakened significantly. Their ammunition was running low, their escape routes sealed, and their injuries mounting. Yet a core group estimated at 8 to 10 men continued firing from the upper level, delaying the operators' advance. A drone hovering above captured footage of men on the rooftop attempting to reposition themselves, unaware that a sniper team on the ridge had them within scope. Within minutes, precision strikes neutralized the rooftop positions. Finally, at around 12:17 p.m., an explosive breach tore open the side of the main house. Dust engulfed the structure, flashes illuminated the interior, and operators poured inside for the last push. This moment marked the beginning of the end, the collapse of the ranch defenses and the transition into the final phase of the operation. By the time the clock edged past 12:20 p.m., the air above Rancho El Mirador had turned heavy and metallic, thick with gunpowder, burning oil, and pulverized concrete. The valley, once alive with birds and rustling leaves, now felt hollow and stretched, as if nature itself held its breath. The final hour of the 5-hour confrontation had begun, and with it came the collapse of one of the region's most fortified criminal safe houses. What had started as a synchronized multi-front tactical assault was now narrowing toward a single point. The second floor of the main house, where the last defenders huddled behind overturned furniture, broken appliances, and spent shell casings piling ankle-deep across the floor. Inside that upper level, the defenders were no longer fighting to repel intrusion, they were fighting to delay the inevitable. Many were injured, shrapnel wounds, gunshots, burns, and dust-choked lungs that forced them to breathe in shallow, trembling gasps. Those who remained uninjured struggled to reload under pressure. Their hands trembled with adrenaline. Their shirts soaked in sweat and blood. From the hallway windows, they could see the ranch grounds below, burning vehicles, lifeless bodies, scattered weapons, shattered corral fences. The compound that once seemed impenetrable now resembled a war zone. The alleged bat strike teams, however, moved with the same calm precision they had demonstrated since dawn. Witness accounts and leaked tactical notes suggested that the operators communicated almost entirely through hand signals, laser pointers, and coded clicks. Their radios remained mostly silent, preserving operational stealth. They advanced through the lower floor with deliberate pacing, stacking, clearing, pivoting around corners, every movement drilled through repetition and training. It was a rhythm closer to choreography than combat, a style reminiscent of the intense room-clearing sequences seen in Sicario but executed with real-world stakes. By 12:28 p.m., the strike teams had secured the entire ground floor. The kitchen, the storage room, the side office, the servants' quarters, and even the hidden concrete closet located behind a false wall, likely used as a safe room, were now under operator control. Bodies of defenders lay where they had fallen, some still clutching rifles, others collapsed beside half-burnt documents or scattered stacks of pesos. Near one corner, a small makeshift altar with a candle and a St. Jude figurine had been knocked over during the firefight. Wax was still melting across the tiles. The last major obstacle remained the staircase, narrow, L-shaped, and partially barricaded by an overturned refrigerator that the defenders had pushed down from above. This single choke point allowed them to hold off the operators longer than any other part of the house. Every attempt to ascend was met with bursts of automatic gunfire, grenades rolled down the steps, or blinding flashes from makeshift flashbangs crafted from fuel cans. The BATS teams adapted by approaching from alternative angles, using an external breach to open a secondary access route through the side of the structure. At approximately 12:41 p.m., a second explosive charge detonated, this one much smaller than the earlier breaches but placed with exact precision. It tore open a wall between the staircase landing and an adjacent storage room on the upper floor, creating a new entry point. The defenders were caught off guard. They had fortified the staircase, but not this flank. Moments later, operators surged through the breach, splitting into two teams, one moving left toward the hallway, the other circling right toward the main bedroom. The gunfire that erupted in those cramped upper rooms was among the most intense of the entire operation. The defenders, realizing their final stand had begun, fired relentlessly, some shouting for reinforcements that would never arrive. They had no radio contact, no escape routes, no vantage points left. Several attempted to flee through the rooftop access, but snipers positioned on the ridge kept the route neutralized. Others tried to hide under beds, behind wardrobes, or in the bathroom, places they hoped might shield them from detection. Thermal footage later leaked online suggested that operators used heat signatures to identify movement in real time, guiding the advance through the house. Meanwhile, in the main hallway, an injured defender, barely conscious, fumbled with a radio handset, trying desperately to contact a neighboring ranch. The radio crackled but produced no sound. The jamming system deployed earlier in the operation remained active, sealing the ranch in an electronic bubble. Alone and increasingly cornered, the defender's gunfire slowed to sporadic bursts, then short, desperate volleys, then finally unsettling silence. By 12:57 p.m., the upper level had been mostly pacified, though sporadic resistance continued from a small group barricaded inside the master bedroom. They had pushed heavy furniture against the door and were firing through two narrow gaps barely the width of a fist. Their shots struck the hallway tiles, sending chips flying but caused little real damage. The operators responded by deploying smoke through a ventilation gap, forcing the defenders to retreat deeper into the room. Unable to see or breathe clearly, their fire went wild. The decisive breach came at 1:04 p.m. A shaped charge placed at the lower corner of the master bedroom entrance detonated, ripping apart the barricade and collapsing the defensive line. Smoke, plaster, and debris burst outward, filling the corridor. Immediately afterward, the strike team swept in with disciplined formation. What happened in those final seconds was swift, overwhelming, and left no room for counterattack. The last pockets of armed resistance collapsed under the surge. With the defenders neutralized, the operators moved methodically through the room, securing weapons, checking for hidden compartments, and calling in forensic technicians waiting outside the perimeter. Their movements were silent and controlled, the tension that had gripped the house for hours finally thinning into an eerie stillness. The battle, at least in terms of gunfire, had ended. But the operation itself was far from over. Once the gunfire stopped, a second wave of activity began, one that would shape the public narrative, raise troubling questions, and fuel conspiracy theories for months. Operators began marking bodies, photographing the scene, identifying weapons, scanning fingerprints, and securing laptops, phones, and documents. Some sources claimed that hard drives were extracted from the master bedroom safe, and two encrypted tablets were removed from a drawer beneath the bed. None of those items were ever listed in public reports. Outside the main house, additional teams swept the surrounding fields, checking for wounded, retrieving weapons, and clearing any remaining hiding spots. A large underground bunker, suspected but unconfirmed, seemed to exist based on ground-penetrating radar, but operators reported that it had been collapsed during the earlier stages of the firefight, possibly from heavy explosives or structural weakness caused by the burning armored truck. By the time the sun reached its midpoint overhead, casting harsh angles across the ruined ranch, the casualty count had become shockingly apparent. Although numbers varied widely depending on the source, several investigative journalists believed that between 70 and 80 defenders may have been present during the operation, with the majority either killed or critically injured. Only a handful survived, most of them found with severe injuries and transported to undisclosed medical facilities. The official press release would later claim a much smaller number. Independent investigators, however, questioned those figures, citing inconsistencies in the forensic records and the scale of destruction visible in aerial images. The 5-hour battle had finally ended, but the aftermath, the part that always reveals more than the battle itself, was only just beginning. Questions rose quickly. Who authorized the raid? Why were so many defenders present? How had such a large criminal presence gone undetected for so long? And most importantly, who exactly were the Bats, the shadow unit that allegedly carried out the operation yet appeared in no official documentation? By the time the final shots faded from the battered walls of Rancho El Mirador, the sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across a landscape transformed beyond recognition. What had once been a quiet rural property, hidden behind livestock pens, mesquite trees, and rolling fields, was now a smoldering skeleton of collapsed roofs, shredded steel, burned-out vehicles, and cratered concrete. The 5-hour operation had ended, but for investigators, journalists, and the families of those who lived in the surrounding villages, the true story of what happened that day was only beginning to take shape. And like every major confrontation in the Jalisco-Michoacan corridor, it came wrapped in silence, contradictions, and official statements that seemed carefully engineered to raise more questions than they answered. Within the first hour after the raid concluded, the perimeter around the ranch swelled with activity. Black SUVs, pickup trucks with government plates, military trucks without insignia, and discreet civilian vehicles began arriving along the dirt road that led to the entrance. A mobile forensic team set up tents, cordoning off sections of the ranch with yellow tape. Federal and state agencies moved in small groups, each one performing tasks with the calm routine of people who had done this many times before. The bodies, dozens of them, lay across the compound, their positions marked with chalk lines and numbered evidence flags. The scale of the casualties stunned even seasoned officers. Some whispered that they had never seen anything like it since the events at Tanhuato and Rancho del Sol, where the official version of events had been challenged for years. Officially, the government released only a short, carefully worded statement. A confrontation with a heavily armed criminal cell resulted in multiple casualties. The operation was conducted to uphold the rule of law. No mention of the Bats, no mention of the 5 hours of battle, and certainly no mention of the alleged 80 defenders who intelligence sources claimed were stationed at the ranch. The statement omitted the very thing everyone on the ground had witnessed. This was no routine enforcement action. It was a full-scale tactical raid executed with precision, supported by months of surveillance, and carried out with technology and training far beyond what ordinary units typically deploy. Behind the scenes, tension grew. Several reporters attempted to approach the ranch, only to be stopped by unmarked personnel who warned them to stay back. An investigative journalist later stated that drones flying overhead were jammed and forced to land, a sign that the electronic interference systems used during the operation were still active. Local villagers watching from a distance murmured theories, each one more surreal than the last. Some claimed the United States had assisted. Others insisted it was a rival cartel using stolen uniforms. A few believed the raid had been staged to eliminate internal betrayals. But the detail repeated most often, the one whispered as if it were forbidden, was the name Los Bats. In the absence of official acknowledgement, the legend grew. Some described the Bats as a covert counter-cartel strike force funded off the books, its operators recruited from elite Mexican units, former special forces, and intelligence divisions. Others theorized that the group was entirely unofficial, a clandestine task force assembled by regional commanders frustrated with bureaucracy and willing to act without permission. Whether these stories were rooted in truth or conspiracy, they spread rapidly, fueled by leaked footage, anonymous testimonies, and the eerie precision of the assault witnessed that morning. As the day progressed, forensic teams collected weapons, Barrett rifles, AK variants, AR platforms, grenade launchers, and hundreds of magazines scattered across the property. Some rifles appeared new, still coated in factory grease. Others were etched with cartel insignias. Investigators also seized radios, encrypted phones, and multiple large cash bundles in plastic-wrapped packages hidden beneath the floorboards of the main house. Several laptops and tablets recovered from the master bedroom were handed over to a federal cybercrime unit. None of these items were ever publicly logged. By early evening, a convoy of ambulances transported the few surviving defenders to undisclosed locations. Their identities were masked, their conditions unknown. Rumors suggested that at least 3 of them were high-value regional operators linked to extortion and fuel theft networks. What they might have known and what they might have confessed remained a subject of speculation long after the raid ended. Meanwhile, local families living in nearby villages watched warily from their porches. They had endured years of fear, caught between rival cartels and military patrols, their lives shaped by whichever group held the strongest presence in the area at the time. For many, the sound of gunfire had become familiar, but the scale of this operation rattled even the most hardened residents. Some spoke of shock, others of relief, but a few voiced a deeper fear. When the dust settles, who takes control next? In Mexico's contested regions, a void is never left unfilled. Within 48 hours, discrepancies began emerging in the official narrative. While authorities reported a significant but unspecified number of casualties, independent journalists counted markings on the ground indicating far more. Aerial images taken before the perimeter was tightened showed dozens of bodies lying in clusters, near the barn, around the main house, and beside the armored truck destroyed earlier in the day. Mexican human rights organizations demanded transparency, noting parallels between El Mirador and the controversies of Tanhuato, where allegations of extrajudicial killings sparked national outrage. But this time, the silence from officials was even more impenetrable. Then came the second shock. The ranch was bulldozed within days, first the structures, then the walls, then the burned vehicles. Heavy machinery arrived under armed escort, leveling the compound until only bare earth remained. No explanation was given. Some suggested it was to prevent rival groups from reclaiming the site. Others believed it was meant to erase evidence, either of illegal criminal activity or of unauthorized operational conduct. As chunks of concrete tumbled and dust rose into the air, any chance at independent investigation died with the rubble. International agencies began taking interest. Analysts compared thermal and satellite imagery, noting troop formations and signatures consistent with advanced raids. Security experts questioned how a unit with such coordination could exist without formal recognition. Political commentators asked whether the government had lost control to covert forces acting independently. The deeper investigators dug, the murkier the story grew. Yet the one thing nobody denied, the one detail that remained consistent in every account, was the scale of the confrontation. Whether the number was 50, 70, or 78 killed, the ranch had hosted one of the deadliest single-day engagements in recent cartel war history. A clash so intense that for hours afterward smoke hung in the valley like a ghost clinging to the hills. But the raid also represented something more troubling, a shift in the nature of the conflict, an evolution from reactive policing to proactive, surgical, pre-planned eradication missions. If the bats truly existed, and if this were merely one of several such operations, then Mexico's shadow war was entering a new phase, one the public would never see, one the government would never admit to, and one the cartels had not yet fully understood. In the end, Rancho El Mirador disappeared from the landscape, but not from memory. The villagers still speak about the day the sky thundered for 5 hours straight. Journalists still chase leads tied to missing files, unexplained troop movements, and unnamed units. And families, those who lost sons, brothers, fathers, still wonder what really happened inside those walls. The truth lies somewhere between official silence and whispered rumors, between the smoldering ruins and the vanished evidence, between the real and the rumored existence of an elite shadow force that leaves no fingerprints behind. One thing, however, remains undeniable. On that day in Jalisco, something powerful moved through the valley, something precise, something untraceable, something that changed everything. And the echoes of those 5 hours still ripple across Mexico's most contested regions, reminding everyone that in the darkest corners of the drug war, battles are fought long before anyone hears the first shot.